Hi, you're with Julian on the Brown Note and John Martyn, a Gone But Forgotten Part 2, the first ever, which is pretty impressive. Now, I made a piece about 3 months ago on John Martyn, and for me, it got quite a few views, but I'd never heard of the artist before and was blown away by the fact I'm into some pretty obscure things, and particularly from the 1970s. So I was a bit shocked that I didn't know that an album like Solid Air was out there. So I did a basically my initial impressions of his music and told a little story around that based on perhaps 4 major albums. Solid Air from, I think, 73, a 10 out of 10. Inside Out, I think from the same year, which is a bit of a flawed album. Another 10 out of 10 really for One World, which was kind of heralded as, made him the godfather of trip hop many years later, and then Grace and Danger. But since then I've kind of become exposed to the rest of his sprawling discography with some caveats. So I thought I'd walk through the rest of the story. And a lot of the albums based around a box set that came out from Island Records, which is enormous, which basically goes up to the start of the 1980s, where his music fell off dramatically into this very schmaltzy, middle-of-the-road 80s synth pop. But the music he made in the 70s was this incredible miasma of progressive, spacey folk music, jazz, blues, and sounded like nothing else. I think Eric Clapton said he was so far ahead of everyone else it wasn't funny. And though he had a very, very slow start. So I'm going to walk through the rest of these albums. He was born in 48, I think. In England, and died in 2009. And spent his time pretty much between Scotland and England, often changing the way that he spoke to suit the environment that he was in, which I mentioned at the time was a little bit like Leonardo DiCaprio in the Departed movie. So we'll go back to him being signed as the first white artist on Chris Blackwell's Island Records, and an album called London Conversation. These early albums aren't very good. In fact, it's quite unusual for an artist to have made multiple albums not showing the incredible music that was to come. I can't think of a comparable artist. I mean, look at his very good friend Nick Drake, made 3 studio albums, all perfection, not one bit of filler on there, whereas it takes John Martyn about 5 or 6 albums to get into the swing. London Conversation, I think, was recorded for under £200 in a couple of hours. Not that it really shows. It's just a very, very typical album by somebody that's in love with the technicality of traditional. And when I say traditional, I don't mean 1700s. I mean the folk music scene at the time. Very, very busy picking, very, very mannered vocals as well, which he would gradually lose. I think one of the big ironies here is his picking on the guitar and singing here is so busy, yet he would achieve so much more by his, gentle strums later on and just elongating his notes forever. So London Conversation, 1967. Obviously, it's deeply in debt to Bert Jansch, the Pentangle guitarist and singer who made one of the iconic folk albums in British music. I think it was self-titled, and Neil Young called him the Jimi Hendrix of the acoustic guitar. It opens with Fairy Tale Lullaby, and that's a very good indicator of how dated a lot of this music is. The lyrics are incredibly cringe-inducing. Most of this album is just his voice and guitar. Very cheaply made, very well recorded actually, but very over earnest, and no indication of where to go. The title track, title track of the album, London Conversation, reminds me a lot of Bert Jansch's Needle of Death, that iconic song, which is, I think, a few of the tracks remind me of that one. He does a cover of Cocaine, and it stood out as being less stiff for me, a bit more flowing and vibey. He's a vibey artist, so this stiff music where it's very mannered didn't really work out. Every song on here is in the same pocket. It's not bad, but it could be anyone. There's no indication of who he would be. I did like the Rolling Home adding a sitar and being a bit longer, and a flute, which sort of stepped out of that pocket a bit and reminded me of one direction that I wish he'd gone in more, and that is of the greats Robbie Basho and John Fahey, who made Americana folk music with like Indian ragga music and made these incredible... I should do a Gone But Forgotten on Robbie Basho, because I've got a lot of Robbie Basho albums as well. And he's so much better. It's nice, like he's not trying to be another artist. The vocal inflections throughout, I mentioned that he'd lived between not only Scotland and England, but posh Scotland and working class Scotland, and had modified his voice in each environment. We don't get to hear the real John Martyn voice, which is exceptional, for a long time. It's very, very mannered, posh, woolly jumper, Wicker Man folk music. I give London Conversation a 4 out of 10. The tumbler that follows is probably worse. We do get the jazz flute from Harold McNair, but it's often overdone. It's often very loud. The opening track is just very frenetic, and vocals, like the accents all over the place. I'm just going to look up the tracks because I haven't put them down, but the second track is just garish because of that flute coming in right over the top of the mix, which is a bit much, called The River. Slightly more aggressive and a confident singing and playing, which is missing from a lot of these early albums. A confidence to be himself just isn't there. I thought the Gardeners was a little bit more individualistic lyrically. Not folk, like he's singing about goblins and fairies in some of these other tracks. It's very, very dated post Lord of the Rings folk music. But I did like the Gardeners. I thought that was pretty decent, but that's got a different... Yeah, Bill Lyons wrote it. That's probably why. It's a very messy album. I thought London Conversation, even though it was mundane in all being in the same pocket, just more coherent. It's a more interesting album, but it's... I mean, the Knuckle-Dee Crunch song, which is near the end, is unlistenable, laughing known David Bowie territory. It's really a collection of outtakes, just sort of him trying on different outfits. It's both worse than London Conversation in some ways and better in others. I think the most potent of his early albums, and a weird road he took, was that he ended up marrying Beverley Martyn. I can't remember her maiden name, a folk singer. He married her, and they thought it was a good idea to pair them together as a duo over a couple of albums, Stormbringer being the first in 1970. And Beverley Martyn fans may wish to turn off at this stage. We also get 11 Helm from the band the phenomenal singer of The Night They Drove All Dixie Down, and a phenomenal drummer. It's not a great album at all, but it has some interesting progression. So it's a co-album with Beverley Martyn, his wife. I like the intro. Go and get it. The drums and blues and slide guitar, piano, harmonies. Probably the most enjoyable full track so far. And there are a couple of really good tracks on this album. And the album split 6 songs for John Martyn and 4 for Beverley, and it doesn't work at all. It just feels like you're switching between albums, track by track. There's no sort of linkage between the two at all. Can't get the one that I want. It's very much, I listen to a lot of Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez. It's like she's not a good vocalist to me. And I just don't think she's a good singer. I don't know what she did after these albums, but on these ones, I think her singing is actually very rote. There's a little bit more Nick Drake here because you get some strings involved. The third track, the title track, he's very good at title tracks. Most of the title tracks stand out in the top 2 or 3 tracks on an album. A much better track, really good chorus, a really good mordant tone to it as well. Sweet Honesty of Beverley Martyn is very drab. 8 minutes with Levenhelm wasted on drums. He plays on 2 tracks. And it just drifts. Like his other long form tracks are so much more interesting than that. It just reaches a point of mundanity and extends it. I don't know why it's that long. Probably because Levenhelm was on the drums. John the Baptist, I think, is become quite a popular track off of it. Traffic Light Lady, I thought actually made good use of both of the vocalists. Probably one of the only ones. Bev's tracks aren't particularly good at all. So it's like a John Martyn EP. You can sort of get him feeling into the vibey music that would come. But it's very inconsistent. I'd give it a 5.5 out of 10 because there are a couple of, like, probably 3 or 4 tracks that are actually quite good. Road to Ruin, the next album from 1970, is actually worse. Primrose Hill's got a nice jazzy free flow on it and very poor vocals again from Beverley Martyn. She's got this Sandy Shaw vibe going on. I don't think Sandy Shaw's vocals were ever that highly praised, but the songs were probably a lot more catchy. Parcels is very Nick Drake, but very listless. It's back to the over-politeness and away from like the initial earthiness that started to come through on Stormbringer. It's a much more polite album again, like the early ones. Anti-Aviator, led by Beverley, is unbearably silly lyrics, but a step back for me again. Nice guitar outro, some nice piano across this album. Very timid. Like he became known for bold choices, and this is very timid. I think this was around the time that Chris Blackwell told him to go back to being a solo artist, understandably so. Give Us a Ring, slightly earthier, like a really low-rent version of the band. Sorry to Be So Long is like it's a honky-tonk when nothing works. But like Beverley Martyn's vocals, they're always very flat. She's got no range as a singer at this stage of her career at all. So she's got about 4 notes that she's dealing with, and the pitch is very suspect. I'm not sure she's always in tune. And John just hasn't found his voice yet. He's almost starting to get there over the next couple of albums. Tree Green, very restrained, very hesitant. For some reason, Road to Ruin, the title track again, it all comes together on this. Like through the opening, it doesn't even need the extra instruments. It is a vibe track. It's very, very good. And he starts singing with these drawn out notes instead of this incredibly affected posh English boy folk music enunciation of words. He does what he's known for trademark-wise, which is dragging a note along the notes of the music, which he does to great effect. And he does it here. Almost a track, it goes into like a soul review for the last sort of 6 minutes. And there's a really good Road to Ruin. I'm not going through the extra tracks on these albums, which are inevitable if you buy them now. But the Road to Ruin version is really good. It ignores the soul review thing, which tapers off for like 5 minutes at the end of the album. By miles the best thing he's done so far across these albums. But the opening sort of few minutes with him on a guitar is even better on Road to Ruin. The track itself could almost appear on something like One World. I'm going to give the album a 4 out of 10. It doesn't get there for one good track. Now we finally get into the good music. He's back to a solo artist in 1971 with Bless the Weather. And if I thought One World, Solid Air was his first great album, I've certainly revised that now with Bless the Weather, which is great. Go Easy, the opener, instantly better, almost like it's carrying on from that last track from Road to Ruin. It doesn't need all that fiddly picking anymore. It's melodically much better. It's just a superior track. And the Danny Thompson, I think, is the bassist from Pentangle, would appear on, I think, all of the next few albums to great effect on the title track. And the vocals just wander all over the track. He's doing a lot better vocally here. I mean, it's almost a very stripped back album with some inflections from instrumentation here and there. But Danny Thompson's, I'm sure it's Danny Thompson, his bass playing is a real high point from this point on. Oh, it's got Richard Thompson on guitar and Danny Thompson. I don't even know if they're related. Another legend. Sugar Lump's got this sort of Roadhouse blues thing, very effective, almost like the track that's split into at the end of Silent Air. Walking on Water, almost dipping his toe into the world that will become trip hop. Head and Heart, much more confidence, even when he's doing like the low key stuff. Really good interplay, as on a lot of the music from this era, with the acoustic guitar and Danny Thompson's double bass, which would also materialise live. And where this album really picks up into the future is the near 7-minute instrumental Glistening Glyndebourne, where he uses this Echoplex delay filter thing on his guitar, which he would use across the next few albums to enormous effect. And it's a fantastic track, and it really does point to the album that's coming, Solid Air. And it ends with, for some reason, a cover of Singing in the Rain, which became a staple of his live shows, and then recorded appallingly in the, I think, the late 80s. That's an 8.5 out of 10 for Bless the Weather in 1971, his first great album. Solid Air, I already gave 10 out of 10 to. That was followed by the much more experimental album Inside Out, which came out the same year due to the success of Solid Air, and just overdid it. It's not consistent, and it's got like outstanding tracks and middle of the road tracks just next to each other throughout the whole album. I'm not going to review live at Hanging Lamp. It's a completist only. It's a very small venue, not that well recorded, just him on an acoustic guitar. Something for the completists. Live at Leeds is the only live album I'm including because it was a preeminent one at the time. And because of the opening track, Outside In, going on for 18 minutes, outstripping the album version, which goes on for about 8 minutes, is the selling point alone of this album. It's like got this glistening Glyndebourne sort of space trippy free jazz voyage through outer space. It's spectacular. And then there's like a 7-minute version of Solid Air, which is much more spectral than the album. Not every track on here is great, and there's only 6, but the album now comes in so many varieties. You can get like up to, I think, like nearly 20 track length versions of this album now. So it's a bit difficult to rate, but it is an incredible album for showing a different side to his music. Bless the Weather was really good with double bass and great interplay. I didn't really rate Make No Mistake. Man at the Station was good. One of the highlights for me from Silent Air, the track, like the choice of the tracks on here is really good, and it's hard to say that it's better than the album version. I wouldn't say that it is. And Better the Devil possibly outdoes the version on Solid Air. It goes for nearly 9 minutes, but a fascinating piece and an essential part of the puzzle for the 18-minute Outside In alone. So I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Outside In live is one of his greatest moments. So the next studio album, probably the most important one I missed, Sunday's Child from 1975, which came after Silent Air and Inside Out. And it's a very strong album. It's really good and definitely should be added to that list of ones to consider, if not quite to the heights of One World or Solid Air. One Day Without You, it's got this, one of my favourite songs of his. He seems to be predicting yacht rock. It's got this wonderful, fabulous, rolling yacht rock vibe, pretty much out of his guitar. And it points to the 1980s, got a great melody. Root Love, really interesting track. Again, proto trip hop almost, and some of the most rock guitar he's included on his music so far. Any Baby Girl is a really sweet pop song, but it sounds a bit unfinished to me. One of his best, again, the soundstage on the title track, Sunday's Child, is absolutely magnificent. It's a sublime sort of trip hop sound. One of his best, I think. There's a cover of... It's quite a diverse album that showcases different areas. And Spencer the Rover is really, really nice. Again, he doesn't need to do all of that fancy picking to get his point across better. Really lovely singing on that one. 2 minutes of the song Clutches is some of the funkiest stuff he's done so far. The message is a bit naff. Satisfied Mind is praised. It's a cover. Another one, there's two on the album. I found it very, very boring and ordinary. You can discover one of his I mentioned in the other piece, you could make a double album of his ballads. He's so good at ballads. He makes some of the loveliest ballads you've ever heard. And that track I thought was really, really lovely. With virtually nothing on it, but some really choice instrumental inflections. And it ends with the epic Call Me Crazy, deconstructed epic blues, and Ragga Indian, John Fahey, Robbie Basho style again. I wish he'd done more in that pocket. I'm going to give it a 8.5 out of 10. The only fall down is that it sounds a little bit like a collection rather than an album. So I did One World. I either gave that a 9.5 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, and I did Grace and Danger, which I might have given a 9.5 or a 9 out of 10, two of his best albums. And the one glaring miss here is Glorious Fall, which sounds like his last truly great album. Which is, it's quite a run from Best of Weather in 71 to Glorious Fall in 81, where I thought Inside Out was probably like 7 out of 10. Everything else is 8+ throughout that whole 10-year run. Amazing albums. Glorious Fall, produced by Phil Collins. I haven't had a listen to yet, so there is still stuff, particularly the stuff after the 90s, that I haven't listened to yet. Apparently the first album in the Downfall, so I haven't got these two albums, Glorious Fall from 81 and Well Kept Secret from 82, because that was when he stepped away from Island Records for 2 albums pretty much. Well Kept Secret, pretty much regarded as the start of the terrible music. Very, very glossy synth pop and very pat, homogenized 80s instrumentation. The first album I've got in this is terrible, Sapphire. It's got like these awful generic drum machines, very soft generic synths that often sound very thin, trademark fretless wandering bass, and bass synth pads as well that sound as generic as they come. It's Michael Bolton music, and it isn't good Michael Bolton music as well. It's in that pocket with sort of like Malcolm McDonald, but not good Malcolm McDonald. Almost to the point where you would only like it ironically. Sapphire is incredibly anemic. Even when it's being overwrought, it's bloodless beyond belief. Robert Plant sort of ish, but without the sort of guts of that. Using a full band sound here, although most of it sounds like they're sort of like when you see 20 band members on a stage at one of these commercial event shows and you can't actually hear any instrument. Most of it is sort of like playing those hexagonal drums sort of thing. It's terrible. I'm going to give Sapphire probably the weakest album in this list, a 2 out of 10. There's no redeeming quality. Usually, Piece by Piece from 1986, I kind of liked. It's got a lot more gusto than the predecessor, bit more rock as well. Nightline that opened it, I said it was a much more interesting, almost moving into the Peter Gabriel Sledgehammer sort of zone, which I thought was really nice. It's amazing how dated his music from the 80s sounds versus his undated 1970s music. It's got a lot of that really painful Lost Boys saxophone coming into these tracks. The music that you'd expect to hear sort of in some daytime soap or 80s legal drama. But it's a more fun and it's a more warm and engaging album than its predecessor. Angeline is absolutely lovely. A beautiful ballad. I thought, Serendipity, even though this uses a template of 80s instrumentation, it's not as homogenized. Like the percussion on Serendipity I thought was a lot more interesting. And John Wayne, the final track, really gets into sort of like this guttural Tom Waits era. I kind of like Piece by Piece. I'm going to give it 6.5 out of 10. And then we move through to the last in the list, thank God, which is The Apprentice from 1991. After this, his music picked up again. He kind of became known as the godfather of trip hop, did a cover version album, including stuff like Portishead's Glory Box, but probably more interesting, and maybe for a gone but forgotten John Martyn Part 3, his albums from sort of like the late 90s on actually got a lot more critical acclaim than this. But the Apprentice is another nadir in 91. Very 80s again with a lot of rock elements this time. It's really generic slop. Weaker songwriting. It's a lot more full and driving than Sapphire, and over the first half of it I thought I might actually like this album. It's a bit more in that Robert Palmer pocket. But like the title track, The Apprentice, really showcases how awful the production and arrangements are. It's so messy. It's kitchen sink, just noises, nothing that supports or enhances the song. It's awful. But the album does fall down a lot with a run of about 4 tracks or more at the end, which are just horrible. Unfortunately, The Apprentice is going to end our journey on a 3 out of 10, but certainly that 70s run, now including for me Bless the Weather and Sunday's Child and Live at Leeds, and I will get that 1982, 1981 album, which I'm missing. So yeah, that's Gone But Forgotten Part 2, John Martyn. Adios.